The town calls her a savior. But only she knows the truth. The hands that once stitched a child's torn knee are the same hands that now grip a knife against death, and tonight the whole town will see it. The church bell struck 8 o'clock when Sarah Whitmore finished stitching the last tear in young Tommy Bergson's breeches. She set down her needle and stretched her fingers, working out the morning stiffness that came earlier each winter. Through the cabin's single window, she watched the boy skip toward the schoolhouse, his patched knee already forgotten. "That'll be 15 cents, she called after him, but Tommy had already vanished around the corner of Hanson's Mercantile. She shook her head and marked the debt in her ledger, another line in the growing column of unpaid accounts. The widow Bergson meant well, but good intentions wouldn't buy flour or lamp oil. Sarah folded the marriage paper that served as her bookmark and tucked it between the ledger pages. The document had yellowed at the edges during its 3 years in her possession, signed but never witnessed, waiting for a ceremony that grew more unlikely with each passing season. She'd promised herself she'd burn it before her 30th birthday, but that milestone had come and gone last autumn without ceremony. The surgical knife lay wrapped in oiled cloth beside her sewing basket, its edge still keen from yesterday's sharpening. She'd used it twice this week, once to remove a splinter from the blacksmith's palm, once to lance a boil on Mrs. Henrikson's neck. Simple work, clean work. The kind that left her hands steady and her conscience clear. A knock rattled the cabin door, urgent and insistent. Sarah set aside her mending and opened it to find Lars Johansson, his face flushed from running. Behind him, 2 men struggled to carry a third between them, blood darkening the blanket wrapped around the injured man's torso. "Doc, we need help fast," Lars panted. Mikhail took a horn in the ribs. Bull went loco down at the Hanson place. Sarah stepped aside, directing them toward the rough table that served for examinations. The injured man, she recognized him as one of the newer homesteaders. Russian by his accent, groaned as they laid him down. Blood seeped through the blanket, spreading in a stain the size of a dinner plate. When did this happen? She unwrapped her knife, checking its edge against her thumb. 20 minutes past, Lars replied. Maybe less. Bull caught him against the fence post, then trampled him good before we got the beast roped. Sarah peeled back the blanket and assessed the damage. 3 parallel gashes ran from the man's lowest rib toward his hip, deep enough to expose muscle beneath. The wounds wept, steady streams of dark blood, but the flow wasn't arterial. She'd seen worse, though not often. "What's his name?" she asked, pressing clean cloth against the worst gash. "Mikhail Volkov," Lars said. "Got a spread 2 miles north of here. Wife and 2 little ones." The man's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his name. His gaze found Sarah's face and held it with surprising intensity, given his condition. "Doc," he whispered, his English heavily accented but clear. "Am I going to die?" Sarah met his stare directly. "Not if you can hold still while I work." She lit the second lamp and positioned it to cast the brightest light across her makeshift operating table. The wounds would need cleaning, suturing, and careful bandaging work that could take 2 hours if done properly. Outside, the first snowflakes began to drift past the window like scattered prayers. "Lars, ride to town and fetch Mrs. Kowalski," she instructed, threading catgut through her curved needle. "Tell her to bring her medical bag and whatever laudanum she has. And stop at the church. Ask Reverend Mills to ring the bell every hour on the hour. If the storm gets bad, we'll need people to know there's help here." Lars nodded and headed for the door. What about his family? Should someone ride out to tell them? Sarah glanced at the window, where snowflakes were falling thicker now, beginning to accumulate on the sill. "Send word if you can, but don't risk it if the weather turns. Mikhail's not going anywhere tonight, and neither will anyone else if this keeps up." The door closed behind Lars with a solid thunk. Sarah turned back to her patient, who was watching her with those steady grey eyes. She lifted the knife, angling it to catch the lamplight. "This is going to hurt," she said simply. Mikhail nodded once. "I understand." He reached up and touched the folded paper that had fallen from her ledger, now lying beside his shoulder. "What is this?" "Nothing important." Sarah gently moved the marriage certificate aside and positioned her blade above the first wound. "Just hold still now." The knife bit into torn flesh with surgical precision, beginning the long work of healing. Outside, the storm gathered strength, and the church bell marked 9 o'clock with bronze notes that echoed across the valley like a promise or a prayer. The second lamp flickered as Sarah completed the first set of sutures, each stitch precise as a seamstress's work. Mikhail had remained still throughout the procedure, his jaw clenched against pain that must have felt like molten metal in his ribs. She'd seen grown men faint from less, but this Russian homesteader breathed steady and deep, occasionally flexing his fingers but never pulling away from the knife. "One down, 2 to go," she murmured, wiping blood from the blade with a clean rag. The surgical knife caught the light as she moved it, reflecting amber gleams across the cabin walls. Through the window, she could see snow falling in earnest, now thick, heavy flakes that meant serious accumulation. The kind of storm that could dump 3 feet by morning and leave the valley cut off from the outside world for days. She'd been through enough Dakota winters to recognize the signs. "Doc." Mikhail's voice carried a note of concern. "The storm looks bad." "It'll pass," Sarah replied, though she wasn't entirely convinced. She began cleaning the second wound, longer but shallower than the first. These things always do. The marriage paper had somehow found its way back beside Mikhail's elbow, its creased edges visible in the lamplight. Sarah had carried that document for 3 years, ever since Dr. Franklin Whitmore had died of consumption 2 days before their wedding. She'd kept his name anyway, easier than explaining to patients why an unmarried woman was practicing medicine, even frontier medicine. A horse's hooves clattered in the yard, muffled by the accumulating snow. Sarah looked up hopefully, expecting to see Mrs. Kowalski with her medical supplies, but instead a different figure appeared at the window. Tom Bradley, the valley's de facto lawman, his badge gleaming dully beneath his winter coat. Bradley knocked once and entered without waiting for permission, bringing a swirl of cold air and snow. He nodded to Sarah, then fixed his attention on Mikhail with the calculating look of a man paid to notice trouble. "Heard there was an accident," Bradley said, removing his hat and shaking off the snow. "Bull goring," they said. "That's right." Sarah continued her work, not looking up from the wound. "Mikhail here had a run-in with Hansen's prize bull." Bradley stepped closer, studying the injuries with professional interest. "Those are some deep cuts." "Bull do all that damage?" There was something in his tone that made Sarah pause. She glanced up to find Bradley watching Mikhail's face rather than his wounds, as if reading a story written there in blood and pain. "What are you suggesting, Tom?" "Nothing specific." Bradley pulled out a small notebook and pencil. "Just that Hansen's bull is getting old, mostly stands around chewing cud these days. Seems odd it would suddenly turn aggressive." Mikhail's breathing had grown more labored during this exchange, though whether from pain or anxiety, Sarah couldn't tell. She pressed a fresh compress against his wounds and met Bradley's gaze directly. "Are you questioning my patient's story?" "I'm questioning timing," Bradley replied. "Mikhail here owes Hansen money $200 on a land note, due this week. And now Hansen's prize bull nearly kills him. Convenient, some might say." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a poorly tended fire. Sarah felt her temper rise, but she kept her voice level. "Tom Bradley, this man is injured and bleeding on my table. If you have questions about land disputes, you can ask them after I've finished saving his life." Bradley nodded slowly, apparently satisfied that he'd planted the seed of suspicion he'd come to sow. "Fair enough, Doc. Just keep in mind that storms like this can trap folks together for days. Good to know who you're spending time with." He headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. "Oh, and Mrs. Kowalski won't be coming. Her horse threw a shoe just past the creek bridge. She's walking back to town." The door closed behind him, leaving Sarah alone with her patient and the growing storm. She resumed her suturing, but the rhythm felt different now, charged with unspoken questions. The knife seemed heavier in her hand. "Is it true?" she asked quietly. "About the money?" Mikhail was silent for several heartbeats. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of confession. "I owe Hansen. Yes, but not for land. For seed grain, delivered last spring. My crop failed in the August drought." Sarah completed another suture, considering this. Crop failures were common enough on the frontier. One bad season could destroy a family's hopes as surely as fire or flood. But Hansen was known for his collection methods, and Bradley's reputation for helping wealthy men solve their problems wasn't entirely savory. The bull, she pressed. Did it really attack you? Another pause, longer this time. Outside, the wind began to howl around the cabin's corners, rattling the shutters and sending snow spiraling past the windows like ghostly dancers. The bull was sleeping when I got to Hansen's place, Mikhail admitted. I went there to ask for more time, maybe work off part of the debt through winter. Hansen said no, told me to find the money by Friday or lose everything. Sarah set down her knife and looked at him directly. Then how did you get hurt? Hansen has 2 sons. Big men. Both of them. They said their father wanted to send a message about paying debts on time. Mikhail touched his ribs gingerly. They used axe handles. Told me to say it was the bull if anyone asked. The revelation settled over the cabin like a blanket of fresh snow, heavy, muffling, changing the shape of everything beneath it. Sarah picked up the marriage paper, studying the faded ink of her signature. She'd signed it as Sarah Mitchell, her maiden name, back when she still believed in the possibility of honest love and simple futures. Why tell me this? She asked. Because you have honest hands, Mikhail replied. And because storms make liars of us all, eventually. Better to start with truth. The church bell chimed 10 o'clock, its bronze voice nearly lost in the wind. Sarah began work on the 3rd wound, the deepest one, requiring the most delicate touch. The knife moved with practiced precision, but her mind raced ahead to complications that had nothing to do with surgery. Bradley would be back, probably with Hansen in tow. Questions would be asked, stories compared, and if Mikhail's version didn't match the official account, there could be serious trouble. The kind of trouble that followed a man's family long after his wounds had healed. Snow pelted against the windows now with increasing force, each gust sounding like scattered pebbles on glass. The storm was settling in for a long siege, and Sarah was beginning to understand that she and Mikhail might be trapped together for more than just one night. She completed the final suture and reached for the bandages, wrapping them snugly around his torso. The knife went back into its oiled cloth, clean and ready for whatever came next. There, she said, securing the bandage with a neat knot. That should hold, provided you don't do anything foolish. Mikhail attempted a weak smile. Too late for that, I think. Outside, the blizzard roared its agreement, and the marriage paper fluttered in a draft from the window, as if trying to fly away from the complications that were surely coming with the dawn. The storm reached full fury just past 11 o'clock, transforming the world outside into a white void of swirling snow and howling wind. Sarah banked the fire and checked her supplies enough lamp oil for 2 days, maybe 3 if she was careful. Enough food for a week, though most of it would need cooking. Enough clean bandages and medical supplies for minor emergencies, but nothing approaching a proper hospital. Mikhail dozed fitfully on the table, his breathing steady but shallow. The bandages showed only minimal seepage, which meant her sutures were holding. In a proper medical facility, he'd be monitored for infection, given laudanum for pain, and kept under observation for at least 3 days. Here, in a cabin gradually being buried under Dakota snow, she'd have to improvise. She pulled her rocking chair close to the table and settled down with her mending. The marriage paper lay beside her sewing basket, and she found herself picking it up, unfolding it with careful fingers. The document was simple enough, a standard territorial form declaring the union of Franklin Whitmore, Maryland, aged 34, and Sarah Mitchell, aged 26, witnessed by nothing. The witness lines remained blank, waiting for signatures that would never come. Franklin had died on a Tuesday. They'd planned to marry on Thursday. She'd kept his name anyway, partly for the professional credibility it lent her practice, partly because letting it go felt like a second death. But sitting here in the amber glow of lamplight, with snow sealing them off from the rest of the world, the pretense felt as thin as the paper itself. You never married him, Mikhail said quietly. Sarah looked up, surprised to find him awake and watching her. How do you know? The paper. It has no witness marks, no church seal. And, he paused, as if considering whether to continue. You touch it like it's still a question, not a memory. She folded the document again, but didn't put it away. He died of consumption 2 days before the ceremony. I kept the name because frontier towns don't trust unmarried women with medical duties. But you are not unmarried, Mikhail observed. You are promised to a dead man. There is a difference. The distinction hung between them like smoke from the fire, visible but intangible. Sarah had never quite thought of it that way, but there was truth in his words. She'd been living in the space between maiden and widow, claiming the benefits of neither state while bearing the restrictions of both. "Why did you really come to Hanson's place today?" she asked, changing the subject. Mikhail shifted carefully on the table, testing the limits of his bandages. To ask for Anna's hand. Anna? Hanson's daughter. 19 years old, yellow hair like wheat, voice like singing water. His eyes grew distant. I was going to offer to work off my debt as her dowry price. Spend the winter cutting timber, spring planting, summer harvesting. Make myself useful until the debt was paid, then marry her with her father's blessing. Sarah felt something twist in her chest, not jealousy exactly, but a recognition of roads not taken. And Hanson refused. Hansen Lauchet said no Russian peasant would marry into his family, debt or no debt. His sons made sure I understood the message clearly. Mikhail touched his ribs again, wincing. They said if I came back, next time it would be worse than axe handles. The wind shrieked around the cabin's corners, and Sarah heard something heavy, a tree branch or section of roof crash down nearby. The storm was getting worse, if such a thing was possible. She got up and checked the window latches, making sure they were secure against the driving snow. "You love her," she said, not quite making it a question. I thought so. "But sitting here, bleeding on your table, while you save my life with your own hands." He paused, searching for words. Maybe what I loved was the idea of belonging somewhere. Anna represented that a place in the community, acceptance, a future that looked like other people's futures. Sarah understood that longing better than she cared to admit. She'd built her entire adult identity around belonging to a dead man, claiming a place in society through a marriage that had never actually happened. The irony wasn't lost on her. And now? Now, I think belonging isn't something you marry into or buy with money. It's something you choose, moment by moment. Mikhail met her eyes directly. "You chose to save my life even though you don't know me, even though helping me might bring you trouble. That's belonging of a different kind." The church bell chimed midnight, its bronze voice barely audible above the storm's roar. Sarah realized they'd been talking for over an hour, the longest personal conversation she'd had with anyone since Franklin's death. Usually, she kept interactions brief and professional, take the symptoms, make the diagnosis, apply the treatment, accept the payment, or mark the debt. Simple transactions that left no room for complicated emotions. But storms changed things. Made strangers into something more, if only temporarily. "I need to change your bandages," she said, reaching for her medical supplies. As she unwrapped the blood-spotted cloth, she noticed something she'd missed during the initial treatment. Along the edges of the deepest wound, the skin showed a distinctive bruising pattern, parallel lines about 4 inches apart, too regular to be accidental. "Mikhail," she said carefully, "these marks, they're not from axe handles." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Number. They're from a branding iron. Hanson heated it in the forge while his sons held me down. He said it was to mark me as a thief and a liar, so everyone would know not to trust me with honest work." Sarah felt anger rise in her throat like bile. She'd seen cruelty on the frontier before, men driven to desperate acts by isolation and hardship. But this was something different. This was calculated brutality, designed to destroy not just a man's body, but his ability to make a living, to be trusted, to belong anywhere. She cleaned the wounds again, more gently this time, and applied fresh bandages. The branding marks would heal into scars that would follow Mikhail for the rest of his life, a permanent reminder of Hanson's version of frontier justice. "Why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning?" she asked. "Because I was ashamed, and because I thought if you knew what Hanson had done, you might decide it was easier to let me die than risk making an enemy of the richest man in the valley." Sarah secured the last bandage with more force than necessary. "You don't know me very well, do you?" "No," Mikhail admitted, "but I'm beginning to." She sat back in her rocking chair and picked up the marriage paper again. This time, Instead of unfolding it, she held it over the lamp flame, watching the edges begin to brown and curl. "What are you doing?" Mikhail asked. "Choosing," Sarah replied. The paper caught fire and burned quickly. 3 years of pretense consumed in seconds. She dropped the ashes into the fireplace and watched them disappear up the chimney. "I'm choosing to be myself instead of a dead man's shadow." The wind howled its approval, and somewhere in the distance, another tree crashed down. But inside the cabin, lit by the warm glow of lamplight and the fiercer glow of decision, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since Franklin's death. The weight of possibility, heavy and bright as freshly minted gold. Dawn came grey and muffled, filtered through snow that had piled 4 feet deep against the cabin's north wall. Sarah woke in her chair to find Mikhail sitting upright on the table, testing his mobility with cautious movements. The bandages showed no fresh bleeding, which was encouraging, though she knew infection remained a constant threat. "How do you feel?" she asked, stretching kinks from her neck. "Like I was trampled by Hansen's bull," Mikhail replied with a weak smile. "But alive. Thanks to you." Sarah checked the window and saw nothing but white in every direction, trees buried to their branches. The road completely obliterated, her fence posts reduced to small humps in the snow. They were effectively cut off from the rest of the world, probably for days. She was building up the fire when hoofbeats sounded in the yard, muffled but unmistakable. Through the frost-clouded glass, she made out 2 riders approaching, their horses struggling through the deep drifts. Even at a distance, she recognized Tom Bradley's bulk in the saddle, and beside him, the lean figure of Carl Hansen. "Company," she announced, reaching instinctively for her medical knife. Mikhail swung his legs off the table with a grimace. "Hansen, I knew he would come. You need to lie back down. Those wounds will heal or they won't." Mikhail stood carefully, one hand pressed to his ribs. "But I won't face that man on my back like a helpless animal." The riders reached the cabin, and Sarah heard low voices conferring outside. Then boots on the porch, and Bradley's authoritative knock. "Doc Whitmore? It's Tom Bradley. Need to have a word." Sarah opened the door, letting in a blast of frigid air and swirling snow. Bradley and Hansen stood on her porch, both men armed, both wearing the grim expressions of men come to settle accounts. "Gentlemen," she said coolly. "Rather early for social calls, isn't it?" Hansen stepped forward, his pale eyes taking in the cabin's interior. He was a tall man, spare as winter wheat, with the kind of hard-earned authority that came from owning half the valley's best land. His gaze found Mikhail standing beside the examination table and hardened further. "Dr. Whitmore," Hansen said formally, "I've come to collect my property." "Your property?" "This man owes me $200, plus interest. Since he can't pay in coin, I'll take it in labor. He's coming with me." Sarah felt her temper flare. "This man is my patient, recovering from serious injuries. He's not going anywhere for at least a week." Bradley consulted his notebook, flipping through pages with deliberate slowness. "According to the territorial statute on debt collection, a creditor has the right to claim labor equivalent to the amount owed. Physical condition island. Negotiable. Under debt collection statute, a creditor may demand labor in place of coin, but if a physician certifies incapacity, removal must be stayed." Sarah said. "Physical condition is a medical determination," Sarah shot back, "and I determined that moving this patient could kill him." Hansen's smile was thin as January ice. "Then maybe he should have thought of that before he tried to steal from me." "Steal?" Sarah looked between the 2 men, reading the trap they'd laid. "What are you talking about?" Bradley cleared his throat and read from his notes. "Yesterday afternoon, Mikhail Volkov was caught attempting to steal breeding stock from Carl Hansen's property. When confronted, he became violent and had to be restrained. During the struggle, he was injured by Mr. Hansen's bull." The story was smooth, well-rehearsed, and completely fabricated. Sarah glanced at Mikhail, who stood silent beside the table, his face carefully blank. "That's not what happened," she said. "Were you there, Doc?" Hansen asked mildly. "Did you witness this alleged crime?" Sarah realized with growing unease that she was walking into legal quicksand. On the frontier, a man's word was often the only law available, and Hanson's word carried considerably more weight than a Russian homesteader's. Bradley's presence lent official sanction to whatever story Hanson chose to tell. "I witnessed the injuries," she said carefully, "and I can testify that they're not consistent with a bull attack." Hanson's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "Careful, Doc. Folks might start wondering about your professional judgment, especially if word got around about your unusual living arrangements." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Sarah felt the walls of respectability closing around her, the same social constraints that had driven her to claim a dead man's name rather than face the world as an independent woman. In a community where reputation was everything, even the suggestion of impropriety could destroy her practice. "My living arrangements are hardly unusual," she replied evenly. "I am providing medical care to an injured man during a blizzard, all night long, unchaperoned, with a man of questionable character." Hanson let the implications hang in the air like smoke. "Some might call that scandalous." Bradley nodded gravely, as if reluctantly agreeing with an unpleasant truth. "Community standards and all that, Doc. People talk." Sarah felt the trap closing around her, expertly laid and perfectly legal. Hanson had engineered a situation where she could either surrender her patient or risk losing everything she'd built in the valley. It was frontier justice at its most sophisticated, no violence necessary, when social pressure could accomplish the same result. But as she looked at Mikhail, standing straight despite his injuries, she remembered the feel of her marriage paper burning in the lamp flame. Some choices, once made, couldn't be unmade. "Mr. Hanson," she said quietly, "I need you and Mr. Bradley to leave my cabin immediately." Hanson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Excuse me? You heard me. This is my property, and I'm ordering you off it. If you want to discuss debt collection, you can do it through proper legal channels after the storm passes." Bradley stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his gun butt. "Doc, I don't think you understand the situation here. Mr. Hanson has every right. Mr. Hanson has the right to file a complaint with the territorial judge," Sarah interrupted. "What he doesn't have is the right to remove an injured man from medical care based on accusations I have no reason to believe." The cabin fell silent except for the wind howling around the eaves. Hanson studied Sarah's face with the calculating look of a poker player trying to read his opponent's hand. "You're making a mistake, Doc," he said finally. "A big one, maybe. But it's my mistake to make." Hanson nodded slowly, as if filing away this moment for future reference. He turned to go, then paused at the door. "One more thing. That Russian's been telling lies about me and my sons, claiming we branded him like livestock. I want you to know that's pure fabrication, the desperate story of a man trying to avoid responsibility for his debts." Sarah met his gaze directly. "I'll keep that in mind when I examine his wounds more closely." Hanson's face went very still. "You do that, Doc. And remember, in a small community like ours, trust is everything. Once lost, it's mighty hard to get back." The two men left, and Sarah bolted the door behind them. Through the window, she watched them mount their horses and ride back into the swirling snow, their figures quickly swallowed by the storm. "Thank you," Mikhail said quietly. Sarah turned to face him, suddenly aware of the magnitude of what she'd just done. She'd essentially declared war on the most powerful man in the valley, risking everything she'd built over the past 3 years. Her practice, her reputation, her place in the community, all of it now hung by the thinnest of threads. "Don't thank me yet," she replied. "We're not out of this by a long shot." But even as she spoke, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The fierce satisfaction of choosing her own path, regardless of the consequences. The marriage paper was gone, burned to ashes, and with it the last pretense that she needed anyone's permission to be exactly who she was. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin, Sarah no longer. Sarah Whitmore, no longer the widow of a man she'd never married, began to plan for whatever came next. The church bell struck 3 in the afternoon when Sarah heard the sound that chilled her more than any blizzard wind, the distant barking of dogs, drawing steadily closer. "They've brought hunting dogs," Mikhail said grimly. "Hanson means to finish what he started." Sarah peered through the frost-clouded glass. 5 or 6 riders forced their way through drifts, with dogs ranging ahead. "Sarah!" Bradley's voice cut through the gale. "Open up! We know he's in there." The men spread in a half circle, ropes coiled on their saddles, rifles ready. They hadn't come to talk. "You have 5 minutes to send him out," Hansen shouted. "After that, we're coming in." Sarah checked her rifle. "Mikhail, can you shoot?" "With my ribs?" "Maybe." "Number?" "We face them together. Or not at all." She cracked the window and shouted, "Tom Bradley! I'm a doctor treating an injured patient. What you're doing violates law and decency." "The only criminal here is Carl Hansen," she added, her voice carrying across the storm. "He branded my patient like livestock." Hansen spurred forward, fury breaking through his mask. "Kill them both! Say the storm took them!" Gunfire tore into the cabin. Sarah fired once, dropping the lead attacker, then ducked as bullets ripped through the frame. Splinters showered the floor. Heavy boots thundered on the porch. The bar held, then burst. Bradley burst in first. Sarah shot him point blank. He fell into the men behind. Another gunman rushed. Sarah rolled and drove her knife between his ribs. He collapsed soundlessly. Then Hansen himself stormed in, rifle leveled at Mikhail. "Drop your weapons," he snarled, "or the Russian dies." Sarah stood, rifle empty, knife slick in her grip. More men crowded the doorway. And then Anna Hansen's voice, "Father, put down the rifle." She stood in the doorway behind him, shotgun steady. "What I should have done yesterday," she said. For a long moment, only the storm and the church bell filled the silence. Then Hansen's rifle sagged, the fight draining out of him. He looked suddenly old, defeated. Sarah lowered the knife and checked Mikhail's bandage. "Hold still," she said. "You're safe." The territorial judge arrived 3 days after the storm broke, snow still piled high along the valley roads. Testimonies were swift and damning. Sarah matched Mikhail's scars to the branding iron. Anna confirmed every detail she had witnessed, and Carl Hansen's empire of fear collapsed under the weight of his own cruelty. When asked about her credentials, Sarah no longer hid. She presented her degree and spoke in her true name, Dr. Sarah Mitchell. The judge recognized her authority without hesitation, and the townspeople at last saw her as she was, not as she pretended to be. Mikhail healed, Anna chose him openly, and life in the valley shifted on its axis. The surgical knife rested in its familiar place in Sarah's bag, cleaned and sharpened. It had saved lives and taken them, severed illusions and stitched truth together. Now, with the storm past and the church bell ringing calmly across the valley, Sarah walked toward town with steady steps, ready for whatever came next. If something in this story touched you, linger with us. We'll handle the rest.